I trusted my boss, and he used me as a scapegoat. When the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, he blamed everything on me and fired me, covering up his machinations. But he didn't know that I had kept copies of all his dark schemes. I had worked for Meridian Technologies for 6 years. 6 years of my life invested in a company I believed in. 6 years of late nights, missed family gatherings, and postponed vacations. I poured everything into it, my ideas, my time, my nerves. Everyone at the office knew me as the guy who would solve any problem, no matter how complex. Mark Henderson, the CEO, always said I was his right hand. I believed him. Mark had a way of making you feel special, like you were part of something bigger than yourself. He'd put his arm around my shoulders during company meetings, telling everyone how lucky they were to have Alex Mitchell on the team. I still remember the first time he invited me to his summer house in the Hamptons. My wife Sarah was thrilled. It felt like validation for all the overtime hours, all the missed anniversaries. "You see, Alex," Mark said as we stood on his deck overlooking the Atlantic, expensive whiskey in hand, "people like us understand what it takes to build something great. The sacrifices. The commitment." He clinked his glass against mine. "That's why I trust you with everything." That trust seemed to grow over the years. As director of operations, I had access to almost every aspect of the company. When financial reports showed concerning trends, Mark would call me into his office. "I need your eyes on this, Alex," he'd say, sliding documents across his mahogany desk. "Something doesn't add up in the books, and I need someone I can trust to help me figure it out." I spent weeks reorganizing financial protocols, implementing new tracking systems, and reporting directly to Mark. The numbers improved, and Mark made sure everyone knew I was responsible for the turnaround. "This is why Alex is my right hand," he announced during the quarterly meeting. "When we face challenges, he doesn't just solve problems, he transforms them into opportunities." The first sign that something was wrong came about 8 months ago. Angela from accounting asked to speak with me privately. "There's something weird with these invoices," she said, showing me a stack of papers. "These companies we're supposedly paying, I can't find any real information about them." I promised to look into it. That night, I stayed late, digging through financial records. What I found disturbed me. Large sums of money were being transferred to shell companies with vague service descriptions. The paperwork all had proper signatures, including Mark's. The next morning, I knocked on Mark's office door. "Got a minute?" I asked. "For you." "Always." His smile seemed genuine, relaxed. I placed the invoices on his desk. "I found some concerning transactions. These companies don't seem to exist." Mark's expression didn't change as he glanced at the papers. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I was hoping to spare you from this headache," he said, rubbing his temples. "We're working with some sensitive international partners. For regulatory reasons, we need to structure certain transactions this way." He looked me straight in the eye. "It's completely legal, just complicated. I should have brought you in earlier, but I wanted to protect you from the bureaucratic nightmare." It sounded reasonable enough. Mark had navigated Meridian through complex deals before. Still, something felt off. "Should we inform the board?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "They'd panic over nothing and demand we cut ties with these partners. We'd lose millions in potential revenue." He leaned forward. "Trust me, Alex. I've got this under control." I hesitated, then nodded. That night, I mentioned my concerns to Sarah. "If it feels wrong, maybe it is," she said as we cleaned up after dinner. "You've always had good instincts." "Mark's built this company from nothing," I replied. "He wouldn't risk everything on something illegal." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few months, I paid closer attention. More shell companies appeared in our books. Financial reports became increasingly opaque. When I tried to discuss it with Mark, he always had a plausible explanation, and a way of making me feel like I was overreacting. "This is how business works at this level, Alex," he'd say with a hint of disappointment. "I thought you understood that." Then came the quarterly financial review. Numbers weren't adding up. We were showing profits on paper but struggling to make payroll. I spent a weekend combing through everything, creating a detailed report of all the inconsistencies. On Monday morning, I headed straight to Mark's office. His assistant stopped me. "He's in an emergency board meeting." 3 hours later, security escorted me to Mark's office. The board members were still there, faces grim. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. "Alex, there are serious problems with the company's finances," said Janet Wilson, head of the board. "Discrepancies that suggest misappropriation of funds." I nodded. "That's actually why I'm here. I've compiled a report." "A report?" Mark cut in, finally looking at me. His expression was one I'd never seen before, cold, calculated. "Like the reports you've been submitting for the past year? The ones that hide these discrepancies?" The room went silent. I stared at him, unable to process what was happening. "What are you talking about?" Mark slid a folder across the table. "Financial reports. All bearing your signature. All containing falsified numbers." "Those aren't the reports I submitted," I said, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Someone's altered them." Janet looked at me with pity. "We've brought in forensic accountants. The trail leads directly to your computer, your accounts." "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "Mark, you know I didn't do this." Mark sighed heavily. "I want to believe you, Alex. But the evidence." He shook his head sadly. "I trusted you. We all did." The board members avoided eye contact. I realized with sickening clarity what was happening. Mark had set me up as the fall guy. "Mark has proposed a solution," Janet continued. "To avoid legal complications and save the company's reputation, you'll be let go quietly. No criminal charges, provided you sign an NDA and a statement accepting responsibility for the errors in reporting." "Errors?" I nearly shouted. "You're framing me for embezzlement and calling them errors?" Mark's face hardened. "Be reasonable, Alex. This way, you walk away clean. Fight it, and you'll face years of legal battles you can't afford to win." I looked around the room, at the board members who wouldn't meet my gaze, at Mark who had called me his right hand for 6 years. In that moment, I understood exactly how dispensable I was. "I need to think about this," I managed to say. "Of course," Mark replied smoothly. "Take the day. But we'll need your decision by tomorrow morning." Security escorted me to my office. "Pack your personal items," they said. "Your access to the building ends today." As I placed family photos and coffee mugs into a cardboard box, Angela from accounting slipped into my office. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This isn't right." I looked at her, an idea forming. "Those invoices you showed me. Do you still have copies?" She nodded. "And more. I've been keeping records of everything suspicious. Can you get them to me?" She hesitated. "They're monitoring emails and the network." "Use my personal email," I said, scribbling it down. "Tonight, if possible." She took the paper, nodding once before slipping out. That night, as Sarah held me while I processed what had happened, my laptop pinged with new emails. Angela had sent dozens of documents, invoices, bank statements, email threads. A message accompanied them: "I never believed you were responsible. Good luck." I spent all night reviewing them, the picture becoming clearer with each document. Mark hadn't just been embezzling, he'd been systematically looting the company for years. The shell companies, the falsified reports, the international partners, all elaborate fiction to cover the money he was siphoning away. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. It was Mark. "Have you made your decision?" he asked, his voice calm and confident. "I have," I replied. "I'm not signing anything." A moment of silence. "That's disappointing, Alex. I thought you were smarter than that." "I've been plenty smart," I said. "Smart enough to keep records of my original reports. Smart enough to document every meeting, every instruction you gave me." Another pause, longer this time. "What exactly are you implying?" "Nothing yet," I replied. "But before you throw me under the bus, you should know I won't go down alone." "Threats won't help you," Mark said, his voice hardening. "You're done at Meridian. Sign the papers, or we press charges." "I'll be in at 9 to collect my final paycheck," I said and hung up. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Mark had made good on his threat, painting me as the architect of financial mismanagement in press releases and company-wide emails. Former colleagues avoided me. Industry contacts stopped returning calls. Sarah stayed strong, but I could see the strain in her eyes each time I was rejected for a job interview. "They're checking references," I explained after another rejection. "And guess who they're calling?" But while Mark thought he had destroyed me, I was building my case. Angela continued to send documents. I reached out to former employees who had left under suspicious circumstances. Slowly, methodically, I assembled a complete picture of Mark's schemes. The key breakthrough came when I discovered the offshore accounts. Through a complex web of transactions, Mark had moved nearly $30 million to banks in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The money trail was deliberately obscured, but once I knew what to look for, I could follow it, and prove who had created the accounts. 3 months after my termination, I made my move. First, I sent an anonymous package to the SEC and the FBI, containing detailed evidence of Mark's embezzlement, tax evasion, and securities fraud. I included records of the board's failure to exercise proper oversight, despite repeated warnings. Next, I contacted 3 of Meridian's largest clients, providing evidence that they had been systematically overcharged for years. Within days, they pulled their business and filed lawsuits. Then I reached out to Jamie Phillips, a reporter known for her investigative work on corporate fraud. I gave her everything, the complete story, all the evidence, the names of others who could corroborate my account. Her exposé hit like a bomb. "Meridian Technologies CEO accused of massive fraud," screamed the headlines. Mark's carefully crafted public image crumbled overnight. The SEC announced an investigation. Meridian's stock plummeted. Clients fled en masse. The board called an emergency meeting and suspended Mark, distancing themselves from the growing scandal. I watched it all unfold from my living room, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness. Sarah brought me a cup of coffee as we watched Mark's press conference on TV. "These allegations are completely false," he said, looking directly into the camera. "I have always acted in the best interests of Meridian Technologies, its employees, and its shareholders." "He's still lying," Sarah muttered. "Of course he is," I replied. "It's all he knows how to do." The following week, FBI agents arrested Mark at his home. The footage played on every news channel, Mark Henderson, in handcuffs, being led to a waiting car. His lawyer released a statement claiming his client was innocent and had been framed by disgruntled former employees. The day after Mark's arrest, I received a job offer from Quantum Solutions, Meridian's biggest competitor. The email came from their CEO, David Chin. "We've been following the Meridian situation closely," he wrote. "Your courage in exposing this fraud is exactly the kind of integrity we value. We'd like to discuss a director position with you." 2 days later, I sat across from David in his office. "Why me?" I asked. "My reputation has been dragged through the mud." "Not anymore," he replied. "That reporter, Phillips, did a follow-up piece clearing your name. Plus, we did our own background check. Your former colleagues speak highly of you." He leaned forward. "And frankly, anyone who stands up to corruption like you did is someone I want on my team." I accepted the position. As I was leaving, David called after me. "By the way, we're bidding on Meridian's assets next month. They're selling everything to stay afloat. Any insights would be appreciated." I smiled. "I might have a few suggestions." 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office at Quantum, watching as movers brought in Meridian servers and equipment. The company had declared bankruptcy, its assets sold off to pay creditors and legal settlements. I had helped Quantum acquire the most valuable parts at bargain prices. Mark's trial was set to begin next month. His lawyer had approached me twice about testifying on his behalf, offering increasingly large sums. I declined both times. As I organized my new desk, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Please. M." I stared at it for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on my desk. Mark would have plenty of time to think about what he'd done. The prosecutors were seeking a 15-year sentence. That evening, as Sarah and I celebrated my promotion with dinner at our favorite restaurant, she asked, "Do you feel satisfied now with how everything turned out?" I considered the question carefully. Not satisfied exactly. Justice was served, but it doesn't undo the damage he caused, to the company, to all those employees who lost their jobs, to us. She reached across the table and took my hand. "But you set things right. That counts for something." "I suppose it does," I agreed, squeezing her hand. As we drove home, I thought about Mark sitting in a cell, waiting for trial. I thought about the board members facing their own investigations. I thought about Angela, who had been hired by Quantum on my recommendation. Had I wanted revenge? Absolutely. Had I gotten it? Yes, more completely than I could have imagined. But the hollow feeling in my chest suggested that revenge wasn't as satisfying as I'd expected. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. "I'm sorry. For everything." I deleted it without replying. Some betrayals go too deep for apologies. Some wounds don't heal with justice alone. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding what Mark had tried to destroy: my career, my reputation, my future. And perhaps, in time, the bitter taste of betrayal would fade. But I would never forget the lesson: trust, once broken, leaves scars that last a lifetime.